if we keep beating the drum that it's about methodology and practice and mindset and culture, and we can't wrap our head around what a broader operating model is going to look like, we're going to wear everybody out. I think we're fighting the wrong battle talking about scaled methodology. I think what we have to do is we have to talk about the principles that make small team agile and scaled methodologies work and focus transformation on the idea of scaling the principles behind these methodologies rather than scaling the practices behind the methodologies. Okay, so what we're going to talk a little bit about today is the idea of scaling principles versus scaling practices. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Over the last 20 some odd years, we've had a progression of agile methodologies. We've had a lot of innovation in the agile methodology space as of late. But if you look out over the last, again, 23 years at this point, something like that, we kind of started with some relatively small team agile stuff, right? So we have things like Scrum and extreme programming, or if I get, really out there, talk a little bit about like Alistair Coburn's crystal clear stuff and his family of methodologies. And then, probably 15 years ago at this point, maybe a little bit more recently than that, we had, Dean Leffingwell come out with the Scaled Agile Framework. We had Bas Vode and Craig Larman start to talk about large-scale Scrum. I guess it was Scrum Inc. Maybe it was Schwaber and Sutherland came out with the whole kind of Nexus thing. We have Ambler with disciplined agile delivery. We have some of the work that Al Shalloway did with his Flex model. We have the PMI ACP stuff. And, what's really interesting is we go into really large organizations. It's like the methodologies that we're talking about are the methodologies don't fundamentally scale. Like even if you think of something like SAFe, what SAFe is a methodology for dealing with 150 is the recommendation, people, right? And SAFe is going to make some assumptions about that, right? It's going to assume that you have encapsulated value streams. It's going to assume that you have well-formed Scrum teams. And when you start to set up your release trains and, you start to do your planning increments, it makes an assumption that we're at about 150 people. So when you start talking about doing even a scaled framework in a really large organization, it's difficult because at some point the organization is going to hit the limits of the methodology. And so one of the things that I've heard the less guys talk a little bit about is that it's not really about scaling the methodology. It's really about descaling the organization. And if you think about what that means is it's not that we're not going to do big products, and it's not that we're not going to have large companies. But when we talk about descaling an organization, what we're really exploring is the idea of how do I create entities within the enterprise that are loosely coupled from the other entities within the enterprise. So if I'm dealing with something at the team level, and I'm talking about Scrum teams, I want to have teams that have few, if any, dependencies between them. If I'm up in the scaled areas, then I'm talking about having maybe value streams that don't have dependencies between them, or I'm talking about work groups that don't have dependencies between them, or product areas that don't have dependencies between them. But when you start getting into really, really large organizations, there is, there's dependencies everywhere, right? And so when we talk about descaling so that either a team or a work group can operate with greater agility, what we're really talking about is how do we look at the organization in a way that we have smaller groups that are able to actually own delivery, have interaction with a customer or product owner or something like that, or an aspect of the business, and can operate relatively independent from each other. And so this idea, this thing I started off with, the idea that it's not the practices of the methodologies don't scale. It's really the principles of encapsulation versus orchestration that fundamentally scale. It's the idea of small batches that scale. It's the idea of creating flow across those small batches that scales. The idea of limiting work in process that scales, right? So there's a lot of stuff within the Agile world that absolutely is applicable across the entire enterprise. But when we think about it from a practices first perspective, there's going to be some size of the organization that methodology is going to hit. Again, just dependencies, organizational impediments, organizational design, technology architecture, anything that creates any kind of dependencies, the methodology is going to hit that, and it's not going to have an answer for it. That's the problem, right? That's the thing that we're trying to do. So when we talk about transformation strategy, what we are fundamentally talking about is how do we systematically over time start to create this notional idea of a decoupled enterprise? How do we start the process of breaking dependencies so that we can have teams and work groups or product areas or different parts of the organization be able to operate more independently? And this is why I think this is like super important, is that companies out there, we're 22, 23 years into Agile as a formal thing, right? From the signing of the Agile Manifesto in 2001. And, these Agile methodologies have been emerging, for 10, 15 years prior to that, maybe even longer. And one thing that I find really fascinating is that we haven't given up on Agile yet. I know some people have. We have some clients that won't even use the word Agile. They know they need agility. They know they need they know they need the performance characteristics of an Agile organization. But they're so burned on the dogmatism of Scrum or the dogmatism of SAFe that they don't even want to talk about it. And we have some big problems to solve, right, organizationally. It's like, how do we get organizations building the right products? How do we get organizations building products that the customers are going to use? How do we get organizations building products on a regular release schedule? Making sure that we're doing the most important things, right? We have some really big challenges. And I think the only reason that we haven't abandoned Agile yet is because we haven't really come up with anything better. Because it's like, if you say, well, Agile isn't the answer, what are you going to go back to? Are you going to go back to functional silos? Are you going to go back to people focused on activities rather than outcomes? Are we going to go back to big upfront planning and long release cycles? I think we just intuitively understand that isn't the answer. But what we're looking for is what is the answer. And you're starting to hear the industry hunt around stuff. Is it a DevOps problem? Is it a digital transformation problem? Is it a business transformation problem? Is it we're putting new labels on things, but we're really fundamentally talking about the same thing. We want to have small encapsulated teams that are focused on an area of the technology, that are really closely coupled to the customer, that are able to produce working, tested, validatable software at the end of every sprint. And we want to be able to do that in a way that's reliable and consistent across the organization. We want to, when we have multiple teams that have to come together, or multiple work groups, or multiple product areas, we need like an organizational planning metaphor that allows us to be able to flow value across multiple teams. And that's why it seems like every week I come online here, I'm doing podcasts with Dave and I'm doing these sessions, and we're talking about like, what does it take to really do Agile at scale? Because I don't think that we have a good alternative yet. And I'll tell you candidly, I don't think we're going to come up with anything better, because at the end of the day, complete cross-functional teams organized around value, that have autonomy over their technology stack, that are rapidly getting feedback from clients, that are testing as they go, that are continuously deploying. Like, maybe I'm myopic, maybe I'm too close to the problem, but I don't see us coming up with something fundamentally better. The challenge is, and this has been my constant struggle with the world of Agile and Agile methodologies. Some people call it the Agile industrial complex. Maybe we're a part of that, I don't know. But this idea that we can install Agile via training, we can install Agile via methodology, we can do all these things. That's the part of the Agile movement that I believe is failing right now. And if we get to a point where as a community we can understand the idea of small encapsulated teams that are operating in a more continuous flow model, testing, getting feedback, right? If we can create those fundamental conditions, we have the opportunity to fundamentally do Agile in any size organization. So you think we've been fortunate, we've gotten to work with some really, really large organizations, tens of thousands of people going through Agile transformation. And in every single one of them, it's never been the methodological elements that have created performance and scale. What it really is, and I guess we could use the word descaling, but it's about breaking the organization up into encapsulated entities so that each entity in and of itself can operate with agility. And then once you have the whole organization operating with some level of agility, then we can start orchestrating in small batches across. And we can actually do some really interesting things with multiple teams at scale, managing flow with Kanban systems, kind of at like a program or a portfolio tier level. We can start managing investment strategies. We can start tying up to OKRs. We can start tying up to KPIs. We can look at the business architecture of the organization and understand where we're going to have bottlenecks in our system, and we can invest in those capabilities over time so that we alleviate the bottlenecks in the system. We can start running the entire enterprise in a way that's risk mitigated, where the risks are front loaded in the system, and you can really do some pretty interesting things. But the net of all these interesting things is getting past the idea that it's going to be the implementation of a methodology that's going to do it. And again, I feel like a broken record sometimes coming on and saying these things. And I think, if you have a blog post that I'm going to do as kind of a companion to this video that, hopefully we'll get out this weekend and be able to have you guys read in conjunction with it. But the challenge is that as an industry, we're going to have to start figuring out how to talk about some higher level things. We're going to have to start talking about things that businesses at scale really care about. And again, it's investment strategy, it's faster time to market, it's being able to get the organization to inspect and adapt, the organization to be able to pivot. And the only way that we have found to effectively do that is through this idea of descaling. And what descaling doesn't mean that we're not going to do big things. What it means is that the big things are going to be amalgamations or roll-ups of lots of smaller things. So one of the metaphors that I use, I happen to be a University of Florida guy, and so over the last couple of years, I've been doing a lot of work down on campus with the entrepreneur and innovation groups, engineering leadership, and probably 6-7 years ago, I got connected to the industrial and systems engineering program. And I started talking to the professors and to the students in that world, and I was kind of asking them about what they were doing. And it kind of dawned on me that what I think we really have is we really have kind of like an industrial and systems engineering problem. But we basically, what we're doing is we're trying to figure out how to re-engineer the software factory. And so sometimes what I'll tell those kids is that there really is an assembly line of sorts that's going on. You go into an IT shop and you see a bunch of people sitting in team rooms or sitting in cubicles or something like that. Or, maybe in this day and age, they're working from home on Zoom and stuff. But the idea is that we have all of these people that are sitting here typing at computers, but there really are delivery pipelines. There is an assembly line of sorts. And there is a metaphor where you start to think about, components that are being created and arriving in a just-in-time way and being able to be assembled into larger subsystems, and those subsystems getting assembled into ultimate products. So we've done a lot of work in the defense industry, and we've done a lot of work in the automotive industry. And when you start to look at like how physical goods are made on an assembly line, again, there's some pretty serious metaphors, but it's almost like the difference between doing like a really high-end boutique car that's maybe being made one at a time versus like having a factory of things where you have teams that are working on user stories, and those user stories roll up into features, and the features are running through a program tier and being continuously delivered. And then the features get rolled up and they get delivered into an epic or an initiative, and the return on investment of the initiative gets tied up into an OKR. And again, kind of like what we talked about a couple weeks ago, we can just argue whether that's agile or not. But I think there's a huge opportunity to think agile independent teams at the work surface level, but then agility at the program, portfolio, investment tier levels. So there's something here, right? And so one of the things that I want to do over the course of the next week, month, couple months is start to talk about some higher level things in the industry. Like, how do you deal with OKRs? How do you deal with business architecture? How do you deal with investment strategy? Do you deal with enterprise architecture? How do you deal with leadership and organizational design and all those kinds of things? But if our mental model is you install Agile by installing a methodology and that's where it ends, then I think we're going to lose an opportunity to have a broader conversation. And candidly, I think that's a big part of kind of why we're stuck as an industry and why really nothing else has emerged so far. Because I don't think the challenge is a better methodology. I think what the fundamental problem is basically understanding organizational design. What do we organize around? What do we do with dependencies? What dependencies can we break? And as Agile coaches, I really what I'm doing is I'm calling us to a higher level of thinking. I mentioned a few weeks ago that I was in a room with one of my Agile coaching friends. We were just talking about something simple like the ability to form the right kinds of teams. And I think a lot of us have given up that that's even possible. So as Agile coaches, as Agilists, as people that are consulting in the Agile space, like, how do we elevate the conversation to talk with people about how to organize in such a way, how to break dependencies in such a way that we effectively descale these enterprises? And again, I don't mean descaling in the sense that we only do small things, but we descale in the sense that we have encapsulation and minimal orchestration from the work surface all the way up into the broader enterprise. And I think fundamentally understanding that, right, having our heads wrapped around that is what is going to give us the language to be able to start to talk about some higher order concepts. And so, in addition to those higher order concepts, I think we'll talk a lot about the idea of like how do you start to form those kinds of teams? How do you start to break those dependencies? How do you start to move an organization into from kind of a scaled mindset to this descaled mindset, this encapsulation, minimal orchestration mindset? And again, just to kind of close this up, the reason why I think this is so important is because if we keep beating the drum that it's about methodology and practice and mindset and culture, and we can't wrap our head around what a broader operating model is going to look like, we're going to wear everybody out. We probably have to some degree. So, maybe sometime in some of my next sessions, what we'll do is we'll actually get a virtual whiteboard out and we'll start drawing some of this stuff out and exploring. But for now, that's all I kind of want to say. Kind of a shot across the bow in terms of I think we're fighting the wrong battle talking about scaled methodology. I think what we have to do is we have to talk about the principles that make small team agile and scaled methodologies work and focus transformation on the idea of scaling the principles behind these methodologies rather than scaling the practices behind the methodologies. Because if we can get the principles, encapsulation, orchestration, break dependencies, balance capacity and demand, focus on small batches, and we hold those higher than we hold the practice side of it, then we can start making some really wise choices about how to do org design, how to do governance, what to measure, what to control, what practices actually make sense for our organization. We can talk about how systems and practices lead to culture. We can start talking meaningfully about transformation strategy. We can talk meaningfully about how do you continuously improve an organization over time. We can talk about strategies for getting alignment across the organization, shared cognition. But all of that stuff is really, really difficult if we're taking a practice focus. So I'll just tell you personally, like sometimes in these videos, I feel a little bit stuck. I feel like I constantly want to go back to the basics because I don't think as an industry we've aligned around that yet. And so to talk about the promise of higher level organizational agility, it's almost like you have to reset the understanding of team level agility. We did a conference a couple years ago. We've done 2 of them at this point called Elevate Agile. And the first one we did in Atlanta a while ago, it was a little bit frustrating because it's like that was the trap that we fell into. We were trying to have this really high level conversation about what does Agile really look like at scale? How do we tie it to business problems? How do we deal with governance and corporate issues and all these different things? But we got trapped in this idea of laying the foundation of team level Agile. So we're gonna have to do a dance here a little bit. We're gonna have to figure out how to have these higher level conversations, understanding that these principled underpinnings are what's really important. So I'm going to try to hunt that out. I don't have any answers of exactly how I'm going to do it just yet, but that's what I'm going to hunt and explore. And so super informal, super exploratory. I'm going to try to share some of the things that we've been doing for the last 13 years with you guys and just open up a conversation and see where it goes. And so it's not going to be like me sitting here saying, hey, this is the answer. What I'm going to try to open this conversation up and just explore some ideas and see what you guys think, right? See if there's a way that we can move the industry into a healthier way of understanding what is really going to drive agility. And I'm telling you, it's not Scrum, it's not XP, it's not SAFe, it's not less, it's not any of these things. It is the principles that underpin those things. And then what'll start to happen is we get really, really good at applying those principles organizationally. Methodologies are going to start to make a whole lot more sense. So that's what I have to say with you guys today. I hope you're enjoying some of these new videos that we're doing and some of the thinking that we're trying to put out. Hope I don't sound like too much of a broken record, but we'll see what we can do to pivot past this over the next couple weeks and months. So you guys have a great week, and we will talk with you next time. See ya. Bye.